Mum is talking to the internet.
Sorry, my internet is so bad right now.
It often is bad on my end as well, and I just have this very patient audience
Okay.
that turn up sometimes, even though I'm very irregular at the time I broadcast. So you're here, I'm here. The internet may or may not cut out, but we will have some people turn up.
So you're live?
Yeah, we're live.
Connect to the 2.4.
Will it disrupt my...
I have no idea.
Okay.
Is that your husband?
Probably connect to me.
Okay. I'm just too different. I'm going to connect to my 2.4G. Just one sec.
You do that. I'll say hello to the audience. First of all, I've got Knowledge, which is a great name. Knowledge chiming in from Lynchburg. Hi, Knowledge. Hi, Kimchi. Hi there to you from Washington. And Molly's here too. Hello, lovely Molly. Wow, they say you were both active sponsors, which I haven't paid any attention to before. So thank you for being active sponsors of the show. How professional feeling. Well, today I am so happy and proud to announce that I have done the work of reaching out to someone that I admire from the internet, from the wilds of the internet. I came across a Twitter account belonging to Lydia, and her pinned tweet was an NPR article in which she was the principal subject. She was being interviewed about her journey from anti-vaccination to being a staunch vaccination advocate. So when her first child was due to be immunized, she took them in to be immunized, and her child, from the article, from my recollection, was uttering some really high-pitched cries, and she brought them back to the nurse, and the nurse potentially came across as a bit dismissive of Lydia's concerns, and that helped create or met with a vulnerability in Lydia that then, when she found online forums which created little communities of people who were vaccine skeptical, she then entered those communities and became part of those resource sharing communities where people do their own research. So what's amazing about Lydia is that she came from a scientific background. She was a chemist, I think a pharmaceutical chemist. And so she already had scientific training. She approached other topics with more scientific rigor, but that anti-vaccination movement had found a way of accessing her maternal concerns and using them to trigger an alternate route in her brain, circumventing her normal logical scientific approach to things and just instead getting her to embrace this philosophy of, I guess, anti-establishment type thinking, where you feel concerned that the government's trying to push something harmful on your children and is hiding negative side effects from you. So for Lydia, her pathway out of that began when she came across an article that or a study that referenced the blood-brain barrier and talked about how, yes, that's protects the brain, various substances can't cross that barrier, and that applies to vaccinations as well. Vaccine particles or neutered particles can't cross that barrier, even in children. And for Lydia, she'd been told that was this secret. That was one of the key planks of getting her on board as an anti-vaxxer, was they'd told her it was a dirty secret, that children's blood-brain barriers weren't as developed as adults, and so children could be susceptible to vaccine injuries because of their young, tender age. And so actually seeing publications relating to this impermeability of the blood-brain barrier, even in children, helped her question, if they were not entirely accurate about that, are there more things that the anti-vax movement is not entirely accurate about? And I'm so excited to talk to her about this, because she said it was a big wrench, that a lot of her identity had become enmeshed in the anti-vax movement, in sort of the group solidarity of being against the establishment. So John Smith is here and says hello from Chicago. Craig says, hello, Dav. I got your show early tonight. Yes, I am broadcasting earlier than I usually would. I made the effort to get up earlier. I wanted to sleep longer, but I'm here for you all, and I'm here to talk to Lydia as well, because this conversation is so vital, even as a microcosm of how people emerge from sort of mini cults. And I think Lydia will probably agree. Hi, Phil, that it was enveloping in the way that a mini cult would be. Hi, Alan's grateful as well that I'm broadcasting at a time that allows people to have more sleep, and sleep is so important. I totally understand how people might not want to watch the show if it's on too late. So I'm grateful you guys are here, and I'm celebrating my own uncharacteristic earliness. So hello. While I'm waiting for Lydia's, I'll just check and see if she's messaging me at all via Twitter, because I think she went off to negotiate email use. Yeah, I think she's working out which of the adults in the family are going to use the internet right now. Kimchi says, hi, Alan, agree with you. And Bob is here as well, saying hello from Bernard's. So I think I've said hello to Phil, Alan, and Bob turning up. Lovely to see all of you. And Craig. And it is a good thing to be able to easily access the audience and to see you all at a reasonable hour, because I've made that effort. So that's very rewarding. While I'm waiting for Lydia, first I'll tell her no problems. No problems at all. I'm just chatting to them, which is what I normally do. So it's all good until you are ready to hop back on. Don't stress. I sometimes think women are more conditioned to stress when we are inconveniencing other people. And me saying that might make you go, hey, Dav, so what's wrong with you? Why don't you stress more about broadcasting earlier to avoid inconveniencing your audience? But I've, I guess, always been waiting for that move to America, when I know it will be easier for me, because my chronology will be aligned with Americans when I live in the United States. But yes, it is incumbent on me prior to that time to try and be more in sync with the needs of my audience. Kim says, adore your show, and this will be a great interview. Thank you, Kim. I might even take a picture of that so I can send it to Lydia to say, look, it's being positively anticipated. Phil notes, anti-vaxxers will keep us from achieving herd immunity, and you feel that overall they are a lost cause. True, but even not true. I want to dispute that, at least to argue that it may be possible for inroads to be made into the clump of anti-vaxxers that threaten America's prospects of achieving herd immunity. And Dr. Fauci has said, look, don't get too disconsolate about herd immunity as a concept potentially being out of reach, because there will still be a drastic drop in cases, because even though the vaccination uptake rate has slowed, people are still getting vaccinated. Yes, some of that anti-vaccination fervor is consolidating. Things can still change. Look, imagine Trump using his new website that he's calling a social media platform, and it's just a website. Imagine him using that to make pronouncements to the effect of, hey, everybody, get vaccinated. Imagine if he decided to get the kudos for that, for telling his followers to get vaccinated. It's reasonably unlikely to happen, yes, because He's more interested probably in trying to sabotage the Biden administration to try and desperately create opportunities for the election to be overturned. He's not in power anymore. He doesn't control the Department of Justice. There's no Bill Barr. There's still Christopher Wray in the FBI, but he's mostly relatively pro-democracy, I think. I think Christopher Wray's pro-democracy. There's just clearly some officials that might say they're pro-democracy but tend to facilitate white supremacist activity. So I'm thinking of Rod Rosenstein, who we all used to think was being really useful, and it turns out under the scenes he was with Bill Barr working a protection racket for Donald Trump. And that's a very topical story for today because Judge Amy Berman Jackson has criticized Bill Barr and ordered the release of the DOJ memo, the Department of Justice memo, that was produced in relation to the Mueller report to try and justify why Donald Trump wouldn't be prosecuted for obstruction of justice. Because people used to reference the Office of Legal Counsel's 1973 legal memo where they said, oh, yeah, you shouldn't prosecute a sitting president because that's probably a bad idea. That was written in 1973 when Nixon was in power, because obviously Nixon helped motivate the Office of Legal Counsel then to say, yeah, don't oust Nixon, don't prosecute Nixon in office. John also has some concerns about Christopher Wray as well. Oh, Eleanor's here. Why? This is weird. Sorry, Eleanor, you were muted and I don't know why. Maybe it wasn't me who did it. I'm very confused. Yesterday I unmuted Christopher Lucas, who's here as well, or who's frequently here. Let me click this again, unmute user, and I hope that sorts it out. Knowledge wasn't born yet when Nixon was president. Neither was I. But his advisors have confessed in the years following that one of Nixon's strategies was to help encourage division in America, to help the bulk of the public turn against his organizing political opponents. So by associating hippies with pot and the black community with heroin, and then making both the target of big legal crackdowns, he was helping to frame them all as unworthy of contributing to the national discourse and unworthy of being allowed to raise criticisms of American involvement in the Vietnam War, and very protracted American involvement in that war, and the sacrifice of many American lives, and the sacrifices forcibly introduced to American families who lost loved ones. Eleanor thinks she actually muted herself. Interesting. Well, I had the power to unmute you, so that was exciting. So yes, Twitter is a little bit abuzz with, or at least political Twitter is a little bit abuzz with the news that Judge Amy Berman Jackson has been critical of Bill Barr, that it will come to light more that yes, Bill Barr was in cahoots. Oh, look, he's even trending. Barr is trending now. I'm excited about that. A federal judge has ordered the Department of Justice to turn over a memo cited by then Attorney General Bill Barr as to his reasoning not to charge President Trump with obstruction of justice. And Ted Lieu has, the senator, has posted some thoughts this new ruling brings to mind. History will not be kind to Bill Barr. Toot toot, for sure. The former president engaged in obstruction of justice. Yes, and the Mueller report described, I think, 11 instances of obstruction of justice that had nexus, which is covering up obstruction in proximity to a crime, a suspected crime, and two other legal elements that I can't remember, but the word nexus definitely stayed with me because I had to learn what that meant in a legal sense. Ted Lieu says, number 3, the Mueller team chickened out. Number 4, Congress still needs to see the full unredacted Mueller report. And number 5, Don McGahn still needs to testify. Wow, and a quote from Judge Amy Berman Jackson. Not only was the Attorney General being disingenuous then, but the Department of Justice has been disingenuous to this court. So, yeah, there may need to be people who are extracted from their roles within the Department of Justice now if they're still engaged in but preserving activities or a protection racket to cover up malfeasance or misconduct or criminal behavior by Bill Barr and Donald Trump, like, to protect people. John Smith is having justice fatigue, waiting for justice fatigue. He says he's tired of getting his hopes up on anyone actually being held accountable. Nothing ever ends up happening. Well, John, let me introduce to you the idea of a timeline, because there's a binary choice here. Either we're foolish to expect anything ever happening, or it's a drawn-out, protracted process. And Merrick Garland was only relatively recently confirmed as the new Attorney General, and there may be Trump-associated appointees in the Department of Justice, or just Republican-affiliated appointees whose loyalty to the Republican Party and to hide crimes committed by members of the Republican Party is a stronger urge than, say, the urge to uncover criminality and to protect the American public from further crimes and to help orchestrate deterrence for any future criminals. John thinks everything's been incinerated by now. I find that to be a generalization that I'm going to guess is an overgeneralization. But there's value to at least entertaining skeptical ideas. So you're free to posit that here. I'm not going to adopt that perspective at the moment myself. August says, the biggest failure was our Senate and Congress holding Trump accountable. So yes, there are Republicans in the Senate who scotched finding Trump guilty in the trial because he was impeached in the House, and then to convict you have to have a supermajority in the Senate. You have to have 60 votes, don't you? And that wasn't the case. There was Mitt Romney, who voted to convict Trump on one count the second time he was impeached. It wasn't enough. It wasn't nearly enough. And Brett Walker's here from Los Angeles. Hello, Brett. We've been talking about the ruling from the commentary from Judge Amy Berman Jackson, the federal judge, who has noted that the Attorney General at the time, William Barr, was disingenuous with regards to the Mueller report. Yeah. So let's see. Oh, Rachel Maddow says something about it. Maybe we'll watch what she says a little bit. And someone's noting, Jason Leopold, who's a journalist for BuzzFeed, and he puts in voluminous amounts of freedom of information requests. So he's been getting bits of the Mueller report handed over to him at various intervals. That was the judgment of a court, that there could be some parts unredacted at intervals. So the Roger Stone email is to Steve Bannon on the 28th of August in 2016. So that's just been released, and he wrote, "Trump can still win, but time is running out. Early voting begins in 6 weeks. I do know how to win this, but it ain't pretty." So I'm going to guess that ain't pretty is a euphemism for we're going to have to commit some crimes to help get Trump over the line. Oh, and a lawyer by the name of Elie Honig. Let's see. I think he's a CNN senior legal analyst and a former federal and state prosecutor with a podcast called Third Degree. He tweeted, "Quick reminder to the Attorney General Merrick Garland. All of Donald Trump's acts of obstruction of justice are still within the statute of limitations." So hello, Lydia. Lydia's back. Hi.
Yay, I'm so sorry.
It's no trouble at all.
Oh, I live in the mountains and my internet just is really brutal sometimes.
It's totally no problem. As you know, I'm largely a political broadcast, so I was able to cover some of my political topics of interest before I get to you and interviewing you about your journey from being an anti-vaxxer, a staunch anti-vaxxer, to being a powerful pro-vaccination advocate.
Yes. Thank you for having me.
So earlier, thank you so much for coming. Earlier, I asked you a question before we went live, and I was worried it would be touchy, but there was footage circulating on Twitter of a mother being forcibly ejected from a school board meeting because she was screaming that masks were child abuse. And of course, that's getting a lot of traction because Tucker Carlson actively advised his audience to challenge people who see children wearing masks and to call the authorities and report them to the police or to child protection authorities. So they're like, look, here's somebody doing it.
And I know, and it's scary because, like, they want kids to be left alone, but then they're encouraging behavior that's not leaving children. Like, I've seen a couple of footage on Twitter today about people approaching, children and like, why do you think you should wear that mask? And, I think that's playing with fire when you go near anyone's child and especially in an aggressive tone.
Absolutely. I think it highlights the extremism of their approach now. It's almost like they've devised a plan to ratchet up the intensity to make it more of a war footing, probably to attract people who like war, who like the idea of war and who want to wage war against Democrats. And they want to give vent to some of the aggression they've been feeling, like you stole the election from us, and now they get to find a new conspiracy theory that they...
Not every child, like, my son has autism and like he wears a mask and I think he's a better citizen than a lot of those people at age 5, like I've convinced him, like, for the community, we're going to wear a mask at school and, when we go to the mall or whatever, like it's I've explained it to him so that he understands. And if somebody
I think most children would be better citizens than those people, though.
I know, right?
They haven't had any chance to be marinated yet in disinformation on the internet.
And I cannot imagine someone approaching him and telling him he's bad or wrong or whatever because he's wearing a mask or being abused or hurt. I think it would really be confusing and scary for him. And I cannot be sure that I would maintain my composure if someone...
You wouldn't. I don't think maintain your composure.
Nobody
would. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, like I think I would lose it. And they're playing with fire when you go near anyone's kid in that tone. I think you're playing with fire, and I think when people handle it gracefully, like, good for them, because yeah.
I did see someone last night that I said was my hero because there was this white man, I think in Walmart, and he was fronting up to a black man and saying, "Oh, black people think they're so tough, but have you seen my back house kick?" And the man being attacked just put his hand in front of him like this is my personal space, don't attack me. And the other guy, who appeared to be either intoxicated or just some serious problems, was literally kicking his hand, and while the Walmart staff or the stall staff were saying, "Sir, you need to go now." And this ally woman was videoing the whole exchange. And the black man was so calm, he didn't return any of the kicks or the punches. Like, luckily nothing made contact with him in any strong way. And from his build, he looked tough. And from his hand that he put out, it looked like that's even a martial arts move, to be like, I'm here and I'm strong and I will defend myself. I'm not going to attack you, but this is a defensive position.
is my space.
Yeah, this is my space. And then when the staff persuaded the aggressor to walk away and out of the store, I hope, he turned to the woman videoing and he said something about just being there for Pokemon Snap. Like there's some new game, because he was in the electronics section of a store. Like nobody was going to get me involved in an incident and distract me from my mission to buy this game. And he was so charming and so calm to be able to engage in banter and smile like that, having just been physically attacked. I was like, wow, yeah, I could definitely not do that. And definitely not if my children were being harassed as well. I would be raging mama bear. I wouldn't be calm. Hello, this is our space. I'd be like swearing and antagonistic.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like they're trying to ramp it up and encourage, civil discourse or whatever, but
I think you're right.
Like, can we just, my husband always says it doesn't have to be this hard. Like, it just doesn't have to be this hard. Can we just, like, do our best and, like, work together? Like, it just doesn't have to be this difficult.
Yeah, that would be nice. That would be nice. But unfortunately, bad faith actors exist. And we assume that adults are unified in our desire to have happy, safe, prosperous communities where possible. And we're not. Some of us, unfortunately, are committed to the idea of advancing our interests at the active expense of others. And that's a disconcerting realization to have as an adult.
It is, and they almost always like feel like they're live action role playing this hero, but it's like if you see how some of them like talk about each other and talk about their cause, like they've painted themselves
like they're literally
as
configuring themselves as Bruce Willis in Die Hard. I haven't seen a lot of action movies, but I always think of that. I haven't even seen Die Hard, but I know he crawls around in vents and he crawls over. I think bits of it,
like and then like how it plays out in public. Like I've seen some pretty embarrassing things of like people trying to go grocery shopping without a mask and then being asked to leave, and they're like, I saw one guy like, I'm gonna put us like my husband said, it was like he was trying to cast a spell, like I cast citizen's arrest on you. Like it just like dude's like, seriously, like leave the store.
Get out. I'm a sovereign citizen. In fact, I'm a citizen only of this singular little country that I inhabit within America. So I don't have to obey your laws. But even people who aren't that far gone are still acting as if irresponsibility is responsibility, as if they've got access to secret information that makes them special and they're the only ones who access the truth.
Like, just because you can, does it really mean you should? Like, okay, so like the whole mask thing, I think you can still believe in like I have a friend, Isaac Lindenberger, who's a libertarian, but he also got his COVID vaccine. He thinks you should wear a mask in public. And he's like, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Like, those are two very separate things. Like, I don't think we should have these mandates, but I also think we should wear the masks and do what public health says to us. Like, according to the evidence, it makes sense. And so I think people lose sight of that. It's more about shirking, any kind of authority over them. And
they get hyped up on libertarian highs, because I'm sure it does feel quite empowering.
Oh, for sure.
To feel like you're an intellectual leader, that everybody else is sheep and you're the only one principled enough to insist. So what I liked about that anecdote you just told as well, though, is it shows there's a subset of people. So we might assume all libertarians are refusing the vaccine and refusing to wear masks. And he's not. He's still arguing for a position that I think is untenable, to say the state cannot compel you to do something that is critical to the general health and well-being and herd immunity. But at least he's doing the responsible thing himself. So he is a part of a responsible subset of an overall irresponsible ideology. And that's good for us to see, because there's so much tendency on the left to negatively generalize about our political opponents, to overgeneralize and say, none of them are ever going to do the right thing. I despair of all of them. We don't need to do that. There's ways and means.
He's a target for he's a target in his own group. Like they think he's like a plant and like he's controlled out, like, they have all these theories about him, and he just he just believes in public health and he thinks vaccines are good. Like,
yeah, well, they have to think that, don't they? Because he's a threat to their intellectual integrity. If he can still be a libertarian but also disagree with some of their ideas, then he's saying that their libertarian insistence on not getting vaccinated is wrong, and people will go all out to try and disprove someone whose point of view is inherently a challenge to their own.
Yeah,
someone asked if you're Canadian.
I am Canadian. Yes. I live in Alberta. That's as specific as I will get. I live in Alberta in Canada. So
great amount of detail there.
Yeah.
I've only recently periodically begun to drop the idea that I'm in Asia, in Singapore, because I know I'm not going to be here for that much. Well, I suspect I'm not going to be here for that much.
It's hard because I want to share who I am, but at the same time, it's hard because at the same time I want to share where I am and who I am and about my life, because I think that's really cool. But then at the same time, like, people can get a bit unhinged and a little crazy.
When you stick your head up to show leadership, there's also a whole bunch of crazy people or people who are off the beaten path of pro-social responsible behavior. We could say that if we wanted to be positive about it. There was some other question in the comments. No, sorry, continue.
Yeah, no, and they'll try to find your weakness, like they'll mention your kids or whatever, and it's a whole thing.
Yeah, it's a whole thing. I'm getting well, this is just for my ego. There's a compliment that says, somebody says that they're becoming a DAV addict and asks if they can borrow my points of view. Absolutely borrow my points of view anytime. He uses the word percipient, which he gets points for there.
Ooh.
I've forgotten what that means. Does that mean it's related to perspicacious, I guess, which means insightful? So thank you, Frank, for the compliment. And Eleanor was saying that it would leave children who really do need protection more vulnerable. Oh, yes, because of there being an increase in phony calls made to Child Protection Authority. It is calling wolf, and Eleanor says children could die because rescue might not come if the lines are clogged with people reporting.
Yeah. Oh, it's true. And I had someone say they called social services on me. I had a picture. I posted a picture of my 2-year-old and I wearing a mask in the emergency room. Nobody could tell it was an emergency room. It was just a cute picture, and like, see, my 2-year-old can wear a mask, like anyone can.
Yeah.
And they're like, that's child abuse. And I'm like, it's child abuse for my 2-year-old to wear a mask in an ER during a pandemic. Like, do you realize how ridiculous that is? Right? Like, that's
and they probably don't. They probably don't realize how ridiculous it is, because they are very probably encountering resources on the internet or doing research that introduces them to the idea that it's depriving your child of oxygen, that they're becoming that the CO2 levels are becoming toxic, all of which is rubbish and readily.
Well, it certainly didn't slow him down. He's still just as busy with a mask on, so.
Yeah.
But and then they hinted that, oh, what did you do to your child to end up in the emergency room? And I was like, well, he broke his collarbone tobogganing, like sledding, because we live in Canada. And of course they're like, oh, sure he did. You seem kind of angry, I bet. Like, they started going on and creating this story.
Is this on Facebook?
This is on Facebook. And he said he had called social services to report me. And I said, well, I guess I'm blocking you now, because this has gone from funny to scary for me.
It's emotional abuse to have social services visit your house and scare your child. So I doubt that he actually had. He was probably just trying to have clout on the internet. But if he had, like, that's trying to introduce your child to a toxic, traumatic experience.
I know, it's insanity. Like, just because I'm doing something you don't agree with, it's not child abuse. Like, that's insane.
And also, he's not operating from a position that's anchored to reality. Like, it's not true. It's not just, oh, we have to treat all
that same
opinions as
person
valid.
had made up like this conspiracy theory about me, how I work with this Russian doctor who's in cahoots with the CDC. Like, I had this whole background assigned to me, and he's sharing like my story and then the background. So like the anti-vaxxers that see my story now believe this. Like, they're not even going to read my story because I am.
Wow, they discredit you. You're working with a Russian doctor to oppress children.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, they're trying to make you less of a threat because your very existence as an anti-vaxxer that recognized she was wrong. I don't even like to call you that, because that label then makes it sound like it was a permanent part of your life, where it was a stage, it was a philosophy that was part of your life for a while until you.
It was, and it was actually heavily entrenched in my identity. So like, you go and you want to find other mothers that know the truth like you do. You find other moms online that know the truth that you do, and it becomes a part of how you deal with things. And even so far, and I wouldn't even say the anti-vax is the whole story. It's the natural health thing.
Natural health.
Which ginger for an upset stomach is great, but if you're trying to cure your cancer with stuff that doesn't work and end up dying, like, that's pretty serious, and it happens. And even for me, like, I have Crohn's disease, and I took some supplements that actually ended up making me quite ill. And then when you go back to your naturopath, they're like, oh, that's just die-off. Like, you're having a herpes reaction. Like, they have an explanation why you're suffering. Or they'll say you didn't eat strictly enough, and God knows I did, so it's never their issue or their fault. It's always you and how you, it's kind of like an abusive cult in a lot of ways, that lifestyle. And
it is, because they're capitalizing on vulnerabilities of the tendency of women to be self-critical. So, you just, and the naturalistic fallacy, like, oh yes, we are the distributors of nature. We can nourish somebody with our breasts. So it would seem like, oh yes, we're earth goddesses. Perhaps we should explore this whole naturalistic world. And then if you get sucked in, it becomes part of your identity, and you internalize that process of identifying yourself against the establishment. So it's kind of entrenched contrarianism, because you adopt that naturalistic fallacy of, if it's natural, it must be safer, it must be better, because look at thalidomide contrastively, and women just took a pill from the pharmaceutical industry, and there were cover-ups, there were people ignoring the data that did so much to inculcate distrust.
And I like to think that every single one of those situations where they have like thalidomide or any other scandal that happened has done so much to make our system safer.
Yes.
So what happened with thalidomide will not happen again. It can't, because they changed policies and rules and all of that to make sure that can't happen again. So,
well, it definitely strengthened the systems. Yeah,
exactly.
By a lot. There was one woman, and I think she was American, and other doctors had been encouraged to approve thalidomide, and she was saying, well, actually some of the data looks questionable, and she was reviled for it, and people called into question her professionalism, and she stood firm.
And I think that she was American too.
She was American.
Thalidomide actually didn't end up in America. It was an issue in the UK for sure, but I think she was able to actually stop it from being.
She did. She stopped it from being.
Yeah, I've heard the story.
Distributed in America. I think Australia has a bunch of thalidomide cases, and those people are still in the court system, still having to advocate for compensation. And it's been a number of decades, so I guess that speaks to how slow justice can be in some cases. I mean, maybe they got some initial payments. I don't even know. Maybe they've never got any payments, and they're still just waiting for some form of compensation.
And I'm not going to sit here and say, like, Big Pharma is perfect. The lobbies can be very, horrible at times, but at least there is policy. The reason they get caught doing these things is because there's policies in place to keep them in check. The natural health industrial complex, and it is, that's what it is.
It is a complex. Yeah.
They don't have those same things overlooking, like, a lot of their products don't even have any of the ingredients they say they have in them.
Yeah.
There's a lot of heavy metal
The
contaminants.
scaffolding to act as a check and balance on the naturalistic industrial complex is not as established at all. It's like a minuscule amount.
Like, of course they're not going to have the same like stories because they don't have the same scrutiny. They're not getting caught because there's nothing to catch them. So
well, they're hoping that at least their ingredients are too innocuous in the first place, so that there's not even a problem if they aren't present in the product.
Just that good old placebo effect.
Yeah, look, whatever, we just sell sugar anyway. It's just green colored sugar in a supplement bottle, so we're not going to kill anybody.
And then the higher quality supplements are owned by big pharma, which I think is really funny.
Yeah, there was one herbal company in Australia that ended up being exposed as having such poor quality control that maybe tablet. Yes.
May I interject? I'm just reading some of the comments.
Oh, yes, I haven't updated the comments for a bit.
No, yeah, there is policy to keep vaccination companies in check. And actually, the 1986 repeal, like when they had come up with vaccine court, was actually pushed by parents. It was not pushed by pharmaceutical companies. It was pushed by parents that wanted their cases resolved faster, because in the actual court system, it took years and sometimes never. And so they came up with the table injuries of children that got injured by vaccines. And yes, it is, Deb. What we're saying is based in fact. Anyway, so yeah, this 1986, law that sent everything to vaccine court was actually pushed by parents. It wasn't pushed by big pharma. It's not paid by tax dollars. It's paid by the pharmaceutical companies. They pay an excise tax on every single vaccine, and that is how these claims get paid out. They get paid out expediently thanks to the table injuries.
Hooray! Hooray. I'm so glad to have you on, Lydia, because you have invested your time specifically on this issue, and that you did so out of a feeling, I'm guessing, of culpability or revulsion for what you formerly were part of. And that you actually changed your whole professional life in that you became a nursing student because you wanted to help people not fall into the same psychological traps that you yourself fell into.
I want to get into public health nursing and talk to parents on that first exposure, because that is how I got to be an anti-vaxxer. My 2-month-old baby, like, I was pro-vax. I used to work actually at a pharmaceutical plant as a quality control chemist. I was very pro-science, pro-vax. I got a flu shot while pregnant. And then I vaccinated my daughter at 2 months. I had some trepidation because I already kind of started going into these natural parenting forums and whatnot. And they actually helped me, when I couldn't breastfeed my daughter. They helped me fix my issues when my doctor blew me off. When I vaccinated her and she had a reaction and the nurse blew me off, this is the group I went to. And I left that experience feeling listened to. I had a reason for her reaction. I left that. I thought my daughter had cryencephalitis from DTaP. So that's
what did you say? Cryencephalitis of
so they in the anti-vax groups, they call it the DTaP cry or cryencephalitis. Okay. So anytime a baby has a lot of crying, high-pitched screaming, or poor feeding, heavy sleeping, they call it a DTaP reaction. And
encephalitis means swelling of the brain.
Yeah.
So they're preying on your maternal fears. So what if there's something wrong with my child, to suddenly escalate that into your child's got encephalitis from the vaccination.
Yeah, and so you leave that experience going, oh my, I can't, if I vaccinate her again, she's going to die. Like, and it just, you gradually start feeling you can't trust your doctor, you can't trust the nurses, you can't trust anybody, because you're given these very cherry-picked small studies that seem to have some clout.
They emphasize, they emphasize injuries, but they don't tell you about compensation strategies, and they act as if it's all part of a conspiracy, I'm guessing.
Yes, so you end up believing that they're generally out to hurt your child, and they don't care about the well-being of your child. And so
Your
I
hand walks down a pathway of belief that they have a profit motivation that's going to occur at your expense.
Yeah.
And I can see how that has appeal, because it's true of a lot of things, that sometimes profits do occur at the expense of human considerations. Sorry, I interrupted. Continue.
Yeah, no. And so it extends to other facets of your life too. Like by the time I had my second child, I thought if I, ate an organic diet and avoided vaccination and did everything perfectly and breastfed him and didn't do the what am I thinking? Not the vitamin K. I did the vitamin K for him, but like all the other stuff that, the eye drops and the natural birth and no painkillers and all this stuff, like, they convince you that it's going to have a protective effect. And even the way they talk about like autism, I had a very negative ableist view of autism, and I couldn't see my son's own autism. That's how entranced I was in this group, because autism was like the worst thing that could happen to your child, and it would wreck your marriage and it would wreck your life. And and I had this beautiful, perfect boy who was just very different and behind, but I couldn't see that he was autistic because of how
they'd set up such a negative association with autism, that it was failure, that it was maternal failure because you hadn't eaten enough organic greens. There's somebody who doesn't understand my sense of humor here, so I'm just going to go back where she says supplements are not sugar. That's insane, not fact. That was a joke. I'm not trying to suggest that all supplements are sugar.
I'm just going to
just that there's a lot less regulation of supplement ingredients in the natural industrial complex. So
I'm cold.
yeah, you're in Canada. I'm definitely not in Canada. You get a jacket, make yourself comfortable. I'm just talking to Holistic Deb, who's my little anti-vax troll in the comments section today. And look, Deb, if you don't enjoy being called a troll, maybe I should retract that, because as Lydia points out, she initially felt invalidated by that first nurse she went to with her concerns about her 2-month-old baby having a high-pitched, protracted cry in response to her first DTaP vaccination. So Deb, I want you to feel heard. I want you to feel listened to, but it's going to be hard for me because I'm going to feel sarcastic and oppositional, because vaccines do help people, and there are a lot of safeguards, and there are a lot of studies, and there's a lot of trials. I've got hair in my mouth, and a lot of security measures to protect children, whereas the anti-vaccination movement is responsible for children actually getting encephalitis from measles. It's not. It's a small subset of children who get measles who have encephalitis as a secondary consequence. That is to say, a swelling of the brain that can lead to seizures and brain damage. That's a consequence that's happened over and over again around the world as a direct consequence of anti-vaxxers presuming themselves to have some kind of expertise that they don't, adopting the mantle of some kind of moral superiority or intellectual superiority that is unjustified and unsubstantiated. So that's my problem with you, Holistic Deb, and why I will likely mute you if you continue to complain about us joking or to keep contradicting us when we are trying to bring facts and real data and not unsubstantiated conspiracy theories that make you feel good but are actively destructive to the health and well-being of children and adults. So that's just my position on that.
And I know she doesn't want to associate me with anti-vax movement, but you can look on Mothering. I was quite big on there back in 2008. And it's pretty much where I lived and where a lot of the anti-vaxxers lived, because this is before Facebook was quite popular. And I was in that movement for over a decade. Like, my daughter was 12 when she finally got vaccinated.
Where did you say you lived? It was called, what was it called again?
Mothering. The website was called mothering.com, and it was a hotbed of anti-vax information, and that's been called out several times. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
And
well, it does sound like they use some studies. So they use kernels of truth or kernels of legitimate study to weave in with disinformation to create a more convincing fabric to pull over your eyes. An
example is the Asia study. So it's a small study that implicates autoimmune disease in vaccinations. Mm-hmm. And I am autoimmune. I have Crohn's disease. And I really held on to that study because I thought it was like this cheat code that could prevent my children from becoming autoimmune. And that's terrifying. Like when you have an illness and you don't want your kids to get it, you want to look for every possible way to stop that. And I really felt in my heart of hearts that if I just did everything perfectly, including not contaminating them with vaccination, that I could stop that. It does. It makes you feel like you have this magic cheat code that stops, because they blame every single childhood condition on vaccination: diabetes, autism, asthma, allergies, rheumatoid arthritis. Like every single anomaly is blamed on vaccination, and so you take away the vaccination. It's very powerful
to just not do that. To stand against society.
Yeah, and just not do it, and now your kids should be fine. And my own, like I said, my own son, because one, I had such a negative view on what autism was, and I feel awful for it. But I didn't see my own child's autism until he was 5, and the only reason that I did see it was because I had started to vaccinate again, and I was like, I think I might be, because people actually brought it up to me, like, I think like your son is autistic, and I just remember feeling super offended at the time, and just like, you don't know him. Like, I know him.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
he's a real human being, and it's like, yes, autistic people are also real human beings.
Yes.
It's neurodiversity. It's just a different way of being.
And I just remember panicking, like this, my heart sank when I realized he wasn't catching up to his peers as he had started kindergarten. I just thought he was behind and he would catch up, and that gap just started to widen. And I just remember panicking, and I paid out of pocket for an assessment because our public health care assessment wait list was 18 months.
Yeah. So
he was already 5. That would be he'd be almost 7 by the time he got an assessment. That's a lot of valuable time.
A lot of I'm a speech pathologist, so I'm trained in the art of
so the younger the better, right?
Yeah.
And and then even then I still was like, I hope he's not autistic. It's probably something else. Like, and then as soon as I got that diagnosis, and it was actually more. He needed more help than I even realized, because the level they gave him was level 2 autism spectrum disorder. So he actually needed quite a bit. I mean, here we use the levels as a determination of what services they need. So I was quite surprised. But he's done nothing but thrive since his diagnosis. Like all of the services, speech therapy, occupational therapy. He has a full-time aide. He qualified for a full-time aide at school. And the aide helps him, keep on task and keep up with his peers. So that's awesome. And this is all stuff, had I stayed an anti-vaxxer, I wouldn't have done.
Yeah, you wouldn't have accessed it, because it would have been too painful for you, because you had a magic stick to save all of your children from autism. It's interesting because it sounds as if they amplify maternal anxieties in order to then it's like snake oil. They're amplifying your concern that you need snake oil to live, so that they can sell you more snake oil, and so that you'll be more reassured about the potency of the snake oil, because they've associated autism as being such a cataclysmic occurrence. Whereas once you accept that people with autism are still just as human as you or I, just slightly different, a variety of different ways of manifesting that humanity, and then it's nothing to be afraid of. It's something you can
And the
celebrate and
funny
work with.
thing is, like, vaccination didn't even, like, he is, in spite of catching up on all his vaccines from, you know, he just turned 5 and he's now almost 6 and he's totally caught up. You know, he's not any worse. And his little brother was around the same age that he regressed at. He had a bit of a regression around age 2.5. We started vaccinating his baby brother around that same age, and there was no regression. So, like, I definitely,
the magic
like,
stick of not vaccinating didn't prevent autism.
No, and it didn't
vaccinating didn't cause it either. Yes.
So it was, and I always used to say that's just a red herring. They just, you know, the pro-vax people talk about autism as a red herring to distract from the fact that autism just causes all these other things. Meanwhile, deep down in my own heart, I actually believed that vaccines caused autism, even though I knew there was.
You didn't admit it, but you still thought you were still convinced of it.
Yeah, because I knew that there was quite a few studies saying that there was no connection, but I still believed it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, because at that point in your life, you were embracing that fallacy of if it's natural, if it's good, if it's man-made, it's more likely to be destructive or damaging. It's interesting because we live in an era where there is a downside to industrialization. So technology and humankind have produced lots of wonderful things, but there's this also potential very debilitating existential threat of climate change and biodiversity destruction. So in a way, I think that feeds into women's subconscious terror that things are not right. But when you find one thing that you have power over, I can choose to not vaccinate. And that might be reassuring of some of those subconsciously burbling anxieties about modernity.
Oh, for sure. And then there's also, like, I wrote an article about the appeal to inaction, because when you take an action that has a potential risk, even if it's a tiny risk, and even if the risk of not doing it is somewhat higher, it is easier to not act, because if I give my kid a vaccine and something bad happens, that's my fault. I did that to my child. Yes. But if somehow fate brings whooping cough into my life, like, I didn't do that. That's just fate. And I know that sounds
You're not
awful,
morally culpable for it. There's there's outcomes that are worse if you're morally culpable for bringing that to your child.
And so I do think there is that appeal to not vaccinate, is that it's just easier sometimes, especially the more time that goes by that you see your children are okay, then it becomes even easier, because you say, well, I mean, I haven't vaccinated for a year now and we're still fine. Then 2 years goes by, we're still fine. Meanwhile, you know, it's herd immunity that's protecting you, which they have a thing about that too. They don't believe that exists, and they tell themselves lies about that as well. But it's, you know,
there's so many lies that you had to unpack, that you had accepted as truths, that were your assumptions, that were your bedrock of your conviction, and you had to unpack all of those rock by rock. How long do you think was the process from going from full anti-vax to?
I was looking at my phone the other week. I vaccinated my children for the first time last April the 26th, I believe. Mm-hmm. And it took probably 2 or 3 months of just constant reading, because and the thing that did it was, like, so COVID hit and I started getting, like, paranoid about the economy, because my store was, like, rationing milk and meat and stuff, and then people were losing their jobs, and, like, bizarre things started happening, like people were hoarding toilet paper, and, like, I was like, this world is just going bonkers. Like, what happens if the economy fails? And then you just look at any other, like, my parents are from the former Yugoslavia. The economy there has failed several times. You know, they've had to, like, reprint money, and, like, it's crazy when you have a suitcase full of money that's worth nothing. Like, I know this stuff happens. And in Venezuela too, like, you know, their whole entire healthcare system collapsed.
Yes.
And you know, measles came back, diphtheria came back. Diphtheria is quite lethal. And that really got me thinking, like, maybe I should prepare for the worst. Like, what if all these horrible things happen? And
so there was part of your brain entertaining the idea that maybe herd immunity is true, and we've been protected, and that herd immunity might collapse if there's some degree of societal collapse.
And then I started looking into vaccinating my older 2 children. I had totally bought into that trope that their blood-brain barrier didn't form until age 2 or 3. And so I was looking, I'm like, is it 2 or is it 3? Because my son is 2 and he's not quite 3. So I'm like, when can I start vaccinating him? And I was like trying to find this magic age that the blood-brain barrier formed, and I couldn't find it. And I was like,
and then you just found the actual studies that said it's there all along.
Yeah. And I was like, I cannot believe, there's no evidence. I can't find any evidence of this thing I believe for so long. And then I just started going after each trope, chipping it away. And a lot of them sound very convincing on the surface, but if you just scratch below it and just look, the evidence is there to prove it wrong. And so then I went from wanting to do 1 shot at a time to full accelerated schedule. My kids are really caught up. My daughter she's 13 now. Yeah. On her last visit, she got 4 injections. She got 4 shots. She got HPV, she got Hep B, she got DTaP with polio, and she got her MMR with chickenpox.
Wow.
It was a combo shot. So she got 4 in one day, and I never, ever in my wildest dreams, if you would have asked me 2 years ago, are you going to vaccinate your kids? I would have been like, probably not. And I always thought I was open-minded, but it's crazy.
Society began to feel like it was collapsing, and that was the incentive for you to question some of those things. The help they provided you initially, that community of mothers who helped you work through your problems with breastfeeding, who supported you as a mother, because it does sometimes feel like you're embarking on this almost perilous journey, and it is quite difficult to keep young children alive. There's a lot of ways in which they can fail to thrive, and a lot of ways in which they can just crawl right off a
my sister-in-law, she says, if we ever hear of a tragic accident happening to your youngest, we will understand, because my youngest is so busy. They just see how busy he is and I'm constantly chasing him, and he is constantly doing he will go for the most dangerous things. He's always looking for a chink in the armor or a weakness in the boundary. His little mind is just constantly scheming, and it is so hard to keep him alive. But he's going to be 3 soon, so
I hope the adventure man.
Yes.
I'm going to go back to the comments for a second, because I think, Eleanor, we have some people detailing their vaccination experiences. So Bob says that my wife and I got vaccinated for whooping cough when my first grandson was born to protect him. And that is often a point of dissension among people nowadays, because that is very strongly encouraged. Protect the babies. Everybody who wants to see the babies get vaccinated. And Eleanor notes that as someone on the spectrum, it is so insulting what anti-vaxxers say, that they could be autistic. It's like you would rather risk your child dying from complications of preventable diseases than having ASD. Their risk-benefit calculation does often seem very insulting.
And I agree, it is insulting, and I actually feel so horrible for how I felt. And I try to advocate for my son and all autistic people. So much of it is changing with the neurodiversity movement. So sometimes, I know certain things can be hurtful, saying the word regression. I don't know how else to describe, how my son lost some skills at age 2, but maybe I'll just take more time to explain it than just say regression. But I know there's certain things that, the community is coming out and saying, hey, we're not okay with this. And I'm really doing my best to be sensitive and try to be an advocate, and also, support other parents, because there are extra challenges that, parents with neurotypical kids may not have, but also, it's definitely a balancing act.
You want to embrace the challenge, but you don't want to buy into what might be taken as a hostile response to negate the worth or negate the value of how an autistic person feels comfortable living their life.
Yeah. And you know what? In some ways, my son is easier than my other two children, actually. And that's another reason why I overlooked some of his behaviors, because he was happy. He was happy to play the way he played for hours at a time. And so what's wrong with that? And so for me, you know, especially I had my last baby at almost 40, and I tell you, that's a lot more tiring than having a baby in your 20s. And so to have a child that was just happy to play however he did, you know, if I made sure everything in his world was right and he had the right things he wanted to play with, then he was happy, you know. So in a lot of ways, he was, you know, easier.
It was easier. That's so interesting. I so want to hook you up with one of my close friends whose daughter has just received a diagnosis, and I think she's still in that stage of shock when all your expectations are being revised, and you're contending with that fear as a parent of, am I morally culpable? Did I do, you know, it's not rational. It's not rational to blame yourself, but it's instinctual in many cases for women to say, I'm the guardian of keeping people safe. Have I failed?
Yeah.
What did I do?
And if I would have acted sooner, would his, you know, potential been different? And there's lots of guilt. Mom, there's always going to be guilt as a parent, even if your kid is, you know, okay, and other
you can have preemptive guilt. What if I do something wrong in the next minute, or it turns out I did something wrong? And the anti-vax movement probably taps into that preemptive guilt a lot as well.
Oh, for sure.
You know, all these diseases, the whole spectrum of diseases that you may give your child down the track of autoimmune conditions if you choose to vaccinate. So wow, what a selling point they have for their angle.
You can't beat that, right? You get that security, you know, if I just don't do this and I give my kid these supplements, and I, you know, that's the other thing is like they offer a way, like, oh, if you just give your kids vitamin A, you know, if they get measles, they'll be fine. Well, no, that's not true. Yes, in a vitamin A deficient state, you are at higher risk for complication. But vitamin A is not going to save every child from complications. Like that's silliness.
It would be lovely if it was. It would be so lovely if it was so nice and easy that you could just dose your kid up with vitamins, choose to not get vaccinated, and your health for your entire life is. In fact, it even protects against car crashes. If you don't have your injections, your child's never going to be injured.
You know, and then these same people in the same breath will say that, but then if they're coming up with a genetically modified rice that has beta carotene in it and supplies, you know, poorer people with vitamin A, they're against that. It's not natural.
Because it's not natural. Yeah. The naturalistic fallacy rears its head again.
Yeah.
I'm checking the comments again. Someone I think was talking about hiding about polio, and I wanted to have a look. Alan says, great guest, interesting conversation. Thank you, Alan. And indoor smokers, he's a pro-vape person. He doesn't smoke. I just want to reassure you. He got his second COVID vaccine today, so congratulations for that. Here's the one. Bob says he remembers when being young and having to be quarantined because of polio sweeping through our town. I remember the quarantine signs on the front door. So Bob is a bit older than you and I think. But it's interesting because maybe tapping into those kind of memories or foregrounding or amplifying those stories, would that help resonate with any anti-vax people, I wonder, to be like a data point that pings a bell for them? Like, oh, yeah.
I shared I have a page called Back to the Facts. They wouldn't let me use Back to the Vax for Facebook because that's a heated word, I guess, now, and you can't use it.
Contentious, wow.
But I mean, and I'm actually sharing like pro-vaccine stuff, so it's kind of funny. But I shared a picture of all the old school quarantine signs, and I just said, you know, could you imagine for a minute, like if they put signs on people's doors today, like that was an actual like public health practice that they used multiple times over the years: smallpox, diphtheria, whooping cough. They would just slap a sign on your door and tell people to stay away. And they don't do that with COVID. Like, it's actually, in a lot of ways, your privacy is more protected now. Like, I don't know.
It's interesting because it would be actually better for compliance, because it's not just a sign to other people to leave you alone. It's like a marker. It's a bit of a scarlet A on your forehead to say, remember to be good. Don't go out and infect people.
Yeah.
yeah, the pendulum's a bit more in the libertarian corner at this point. So I guess that would be more unheard of.
And at in the same breath, they're saying like, no, that we don't have rights like we used to. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like they just put a sign on your door and tell you to stay home.
Images are very powerful arguments. We should I should go to your page and get some of those resources and put them on Twitter, because even if I'm just throwing a pebble in the pond, it's a pebble that can have ripples, and other people can scoop up that pebble and throw it in themselves.
And it is like and a lot of people, like I get a lot of flack from anti-vaxxers. Like I was never really one of them, and I'm a paid shill or whatever. And they'll tell me like, no true anti-vaxxer would ever change their mind. You were never one of us, whatever. And I just say, you know what? Okay. I mean, that's what a lot of cults say when you leave. That's fine.
Yeah.
But I have a private support group on Facebook that says otherwise.
It's sandbagging up the walls to say no more escapees, because if you sound reasonable to people, then there'll be a lot of people following you out that door. So they know what a potent threat you are to the integrity of their mission. That they need to keep deluding more people.
And it's a small group. I'm not going to say there's thousands of us, because, you know, it is kind of hard to reach that demographic. But I'd say about 2 or 3 people a day ask to join our private Facebook group, specifically for people that are leaving the anti-vax movement. It's not just like, oh, I'm unsure about vaccines, educate me. It's more like, okay, I was really part of this mindset for a long time, and I have a lot of anxiety, even though logically I know I should vaccinate my children. Like, how do you deal with that anxiety? And so that's where our group comes in and says, okay, like,
you help them iron out the legacy of fear that they've left you with, because you relinquish the magic wand and you're still left with what the other thing they gave you, which was the appetite for the magic wand, which was the anxiety that they secretly amplified in you without you even knowing. You didn't notice the anxiety that they gave you because you had the magic wand, but it was there saying you could slip up as a bad mother, and your children could get autism because you do the wrong thing, or maybe you stand too close to a vaccinated person. Like that sounds like I'm making a ridiculous, humorous exaggeration again, but I'm not, because anti-vaxxers at the moment are complaining about proximity to vaccinated people because they're worried that there's going to be shedding.
And I think it's in a weird way, it's almost revenge, like, because everyone's like wanting to keep unvaccinated children out of school because they might shed something they don't have, whatever. Like that's a whole herd immunity. That's why. Like, so in a way, I think it's revenge on like pro-vaccine people. Like, we're afraid of you now because you're shedding and you're dirty and you're this. Like, it is psychological projection, and it's not rooted in any manner of fact. It's almost like petty revenge for how they feel they've been treated for the last few decades. Like,
it's sandbagging their own psyche up again, isn't it?
Yeah.
You see that with Trumpists who've been accused of being racist and Nazis, and then they have Senator Tim Scott respond to President Biden's address to the Congress or to the nation, and they're like, see, you're the racist ones for criticizing the only Black Republican senator, or you're the true fascist. And they love it. They love calling pro-public health people fascists, and that it's all part of a worrying descent into totalitarianism, precisely because we've been saying that specifically about Trumpism, that it's a modern iteration of fascism. So it protects them against that concern. Like, don't worry, followers, don't feel worried that you're fascist. They're the fascists.
Like, exactly. And it's what a mess the last few years has just been crazy, like with how politics has gone, and like I mean, kudos to you for like delivering news on it every day, because I would just feel really dejected at the end of every day if I had to like constantly.
Well, hey, we won. Trump got outed from office.
I know.
And I was broadcasting when the networks pronounced his victory. It was like the middle of the night for me, and I had not been sleeping so well because of all the counting and, is Biden going to win? Like, he'd already substantially won a popular vote victory, but because of the electoral college peculiarities of the United States, it was this still nail-biting thing. And I was online live with people, and we said, oh, the networks have called it. And I started to like cry happy tears, and everybody was erupting in this paroxysm of, I guess, a little bit of congratulations for ourselves. And people were saying, thank you for everything you've done. And I was like, I'm still tiny, and I have this relatively tiny audience, but it was something. It was something, and it helped people emotionally cope with the despair, the endless cycles of despair of their winning, and their propaganda efforts are so strong. And you go, well, at least it is nice to be part of something bigger than yourself. At least it is nice to join with other like-minded people, even if the downside is accepting that so many adults are not helpful, pro-social, community-minded people, but are actively pursuing paths that will harm other people. Even that depressing realization can...
Something like made me think about, like, especially with this COVID thing, do you think because our generation, like the last like 30 years, has not really gone through anything that's required us to work to get, like, there's just like selfishness, like, that is just unreal to me. Like, it's
There's
almost
a degree of...
like people that lived through World War II and like when Germany was bombing the UK and they had to like turn their lights on. Like, I just feel like today people would be like, I don't have to turn out my lights. Like, I'm not turning out my lights for anything. Like, I just feel like nobody would come together
maybe you're succumbing to a naturalistic fallacy of expecting that people will naturally to come together, because some of them do. I mean, lots of people have made extraordinary sacrifices. It's just not as universal as we might expect. So we're just coming up against our own naivety. But interestingly enough, there's been a documented reduction in the suicide rate, because this is a big crisis, and crises do unify people. So yeah, we haven't had a lot of crises that have required us to pull together in the way that we are now.
Yeah, and even imagine we're checking in on each other a lot more. Like, hey, how are you doing?
How you doing? Let's hook up on...
This really sucks. How you doing?
How you doing? Exactly. So there is more connectivity, and people who might before have felt really isolated in their depression and anxiety are at least being exposed to lots of other people publicly commenting on their depression and anxiety and their isolation. So it's actually less isolating. There's a lot of people whose symptoms of depression and anxiety have probably been relieved by the COVID pandemic. And that's, I know, counterintuitive to a lot of people who are like, no, depression and anxiety are going to be made worse. And the actual answer to that is no, they're made more universal. And in that commonality, there's actually relief for some people with the more severe symptoms.
Spread it around thinner.
Yeah, and then we can bond over it, and people with the worst symptoms. So that's one explanation of why the suicide rate has dropped. Even though people were like, no, young people will be more at risk. There are more risks, and there is a lot more prevalent suffering, but a reduction of the extreme suffering of some people whose isolation felt very specific to them. And isolation is now more widespread and therefore less specific. So yeah, I think when you have uninterrupted periods of prosperity, you have more intergenerational resentment of older people who've lived through the war and who've sacrificed more, saying, you young people, you're good for nothing, you've never known hardship, you just have all these advantages that my generation didn't have, so you are spoiled and we hate you. And that intergenerational conflict can sometimes fuel a contrarianism that gets people like Trump in power, because you despise other people as being soft, and you separate your world into soft people who think you should welcome immigrants and who don't understand that that's how you get 9/11. Yeah. I mean,
that's definitely, I see what you're saying for sure.
It's pure speculation. I'm going out big picture, and I'll go back to the comments to re-anchor myself in our conversation again. Eleanor says that her dad had polio. It led him to be a leader in the movement that created the ADA, and his dad helped get the vaccination out to all of Illinois. That's very cool. I don't know what the ADA is, though.
Is that the American Disability Association? Or Act? Is that what that is?
That sounds very plausible. I'm sure Eleanor or someone will clarify that for us.
Yes.
Yes. Excellent. Wow. And Marsha's noting that there's also post-polio syndrome that you can get decades later after having polio. It's the same with chickenpox as well, isn't it? That you can get
Like
shingles later on in life.
Yeah, that's another big anti-vax lie, by the way. I see them all the time now. I'm like, oh no, that's something they were really big on too, was the vaccine. They blamed the vaccine for causing shingles because kids didn't get chickenpox anymore and didn't give you a boosting exposure as an adult to shingles. But if once the gap closes between children being totally vaccinated and growing into adulthood, shingles just won't exist because the wild chickenpox virus is what causes shingles. So it's just this thing where they're like, the vaccine caused this shingles problem. And so you go, oh yeah, that makes sense. But then when you actually like scratch the surface of it, it's actually...
And you don't scratch the surface of it when you're in that group because of the compelling cohesive powers of group identity, and that people who've given you that warm, fuzzy feeling of supporting you and helping you through breastfeeding challenges, you don't question what they say anymore. It just you become an undiscerning consumer of facts that they present you with.
And there's even like almost like a puritanical undertone to the anti-vax movement, and that's common in a lot of like extreme religions and cults as well, where like a child that's injured is contaminated, and an unvaccinated child is the picture of purity and health, and so you don't want your child to be, you know, contaminated and damaged. And you know, they have this very colorful language and how they describe, you know, unvaccinated children and vaccinated children, and
it's psychological manipulation. That use of adjectives as color to cement your convictions.
Yeah.
Wow. So pure, free, frolicking, golden-haired. I guess they don't mind what hair. Is there racism in the anti-vax movement? There's racism in lots of movements, so I don't have any reason to suspect that there would be. But
I think there are people of every walk in the anti-vax movement. That said, I think that a lot of privileged white people are anti-vax because they can afford, you know, well, the naturopaths and the supplements and like, you know, it's a big thing. And even in the culture of like, you know, stay-at-home moms that are selling all these like products and oils and MLM stuff, like, you know, it's quite common in those groups, and that tends to be
quite white dominant.
Yeah. So,
and that's not to be, I don't want to say there's anything inherently wrong with being white, just that it's a function of economic exclusion that has occurred in the US on a race basis, and I'm presuming Canada as well, and Australia. That makes it more difficult, that there are more gatekeepers. And
to be fair too, like they make up the majority of the population, and so you're gonna have it more in that group as well. So
just to be demographically representative, there would be but I think.
But yeah, there's definitely some
when
privilege.
I grasp my stereotype says yes, white, privileged, relatively affluent mum. In Australia, I know the suburbs that have the lowest vaccination rates. Some of them are in more drug towns which are renowned for high rates of marijuana use and very naturalistic farm, hippie lifestyles. Those have low vaccination rates, but also some of, which often surprises people, some of the wealthiest suburbs also have low vaccination rates, where they're well-educated women who are just coasting on herd immunity to succumb to that lure of inaction that you described.
Like, I don't have to take that risk. Everyone else will just do it for me. Like,
my poor child, I don't have to expose my child to any risk of a vaccine injury because I'm aware enough of how herd immunity works to know that they can coast, and I don't have to accept that tiny risk of vaccine injury for my child.
Yeah.
I'm too privileged and special, and I can pay for a naturopath who will help convince me that I'm doing the right thing anyway by living this pure existence and buying organic cotton. I don't have a problem with organic cotton. I have a problem with the organic associations bleeding over into saying don't take vaccinations because they're not organic.
Yes.
Doctors in Australia were actually advised at one point to stop using the word natural. So they're still advised to recommend breastfeeding, but they were advised not to say we recommend breastfeeding because it's natural, because they wanted to try and break that association.
Yes, because I also thought, if I just breastfeed my children for, 2 years at least, and, they're not going to get affected by these diseases because the breast milk will protect them. Like, you just believe in basically in magic. And,
I was about to say magic because my husband will definitely tell you that I succumbed to that, and that I thought my breasts were magic and that breastfeeding my children was magic. And I was also very committed to being equitable about it. So I breastfed my first child, my son, for 2.5 years, and then I was adamant that I had to breastfeed my second child for exactly that amount of time as well, to be fair.
I got a little shorter each time. So my first child was 2 years, then my second child was like a couple months minus 2 years, and then like my third child, I was like, I think he was like 17 months, and I was like, I'm done. Like, you're done. We're done. Because like oh man, and I kudos to people that keep having kids, and well,
my mother-in-law had 8. Jesus. Good for her. Well done. Thank you for producing your son, who I've married, as well as all of his wonderful and lovely siblings.
I have a friend in town who's like fundamentally Catholic, and she's got like, I think she just had her 10th baby. Like 10 children. Wow, we don't spend a lot of time together, but I swear every time I see her, she's got a new baby.
When you said before that appeal to inaction, and I'll so have to get that article you wrote from you about that. It sounds really interesting. But there's a bit of a reverse. The opposite of appeal to inaction is the magical promises of action. So the implication is when you breastfeed your child, the research suggests you might be conferring all these advantages on your child. It might not, because that kind of
and a lot of the studies are quite small. Like, I remember just looking for one because I was worried about Hib, which is like Haemophilus influenza B. And I found all these small studies that showed that, kids that were breastfed, got Hib at much lower rates well into their childhood, even just regardless of how long you breastfed them for. So I was like, see, I don't need to do that vaccine. I'm breastfeeding my kid, and this small study here supports that what I'm thinking.
Yeah, and it's like the arm is like 4 children, and then 4 children in the non-breastfeeding arm.
It's like
you can't get much of a statistically powered result with that.
But you'll hold on to that when you're in that movement. You'll find these little small underpowered
any data point is embraced because it's the power of confirmation bias will devour anything in its path, basically. The promise of breastfeeding, that it might make your kids smarter. I mean, can't really tell. Maybe just the breastfeeding populations, the mums who had the time to sit on their butts and breastfeed for that long, maybe
or even just like the interaction, like, you're looking in your kid's face more, or, could it be that, moms that breastfeed have the luxury to stay home longer. Like, there's many different demographical things that can affect the outcome of a child, like confounding factors, right? So it's not always what it seems.
Yeah. So I was, again, happy to accept that it wasn't a guarantee, but as opposite to appeal to inaction, it was an appeal to overpromising. So I was just like, well, on the off chance that any of that is true, I will continue to breastfeed my children.
That's good. Like, I did a bit of breastfeeding counseling for other women because there was not much help in my town. And if women want to do it and they want help, like, they should be helped. Like, but if a woman doesn't want to do it, we live in a day and age where it's different if you live in a country where there's no access to clean water, and breastfeeding will make a huge difference in areas like that. But in terms of like North
formula
America,
is not heroin. Formula is not heroin, and that inflation of that choice.
Yeah.
Because I've heard of some baby that had a stroke because their mother was so adamant that they weren't going to give their child formula, even though she wasn't producing breast milk, because formula was heroin, that her baby wasn't getting anything, any liquid or any nourishment, and her baby had a seizure and then had some neurological damage as a consequence of that. And that made me really go, wow, I have over magicked breast milk, and I'm perpetuating that stigma against formula by my wholehearted embrace of breastfeeding. So I still think breastfeeding is great. Go for it if you can and you want to, but don't demonize the alternative.
And I tell you, man, with my last baby, I had horrible postpartum and no supply, and he refused to take a bottle, and I would have killed for him to just take formula so that I could work on my mental health. And the only option I had when I talked to my doctor was to leave him with someone, and it could take up to 2 days for him to take a bottle. And I was like, I can't leave a 5-month-old baby. That's like, I just can't. So I just, luckily when I started medication for my postpartum, which a lot of people in the anti-vax movement would judge me for anyway, because I was breastfeeding. But when I was able to resolve my supply issues because I was able to eat again and not stress. But I would have killed for a baby that took formula, and
it's so fascinating what you're saying about craving the approval, or at least being afraid of the disapproval of people you're with, because it's as if it's extended a family dynamic of parents potentially withholding love and approval, and people are getting locked into that almost infantilizing dynamic of looking for approval instead of being able to just give themselves approval, being really afraid. It's like there's no legal consequences for you if your in-group disapproves of your actions, but once you get into that sort of cult family, intense family dynamic, and you're like, they might judge me.
My friend Heather too, like Heather Simpson's my partner. She's been kind of in the news for coming around on anti-vax in the state side of things. And she said too, like she had endometriosis, and they had told her, you're just not eating well enough, and you're not taking care of yourself well enough. And she went to a doctor and got medication, and they judged her for it. Like they were like, you failed, and
you've betrayed.
You'd have just done this. And that's what kind of clued her into like, these people aren't my friends. This is just an ideology I've wrapped myself in, and I can't do anything differently. Otherwise I'm going against the doctrine. So that's kind of what got her thinking of like, I can't treat myself.
Is this a cult that I have inadvertently joined? Yes, it is a cult.
So it's really, it's crazy how you find yourself in these things, and there's always that one thing that just makes you question, like, what did I get myself into?
Frank asked a question: how are the respective infection rates in those two demographics? And that was 7 minutes ago. So Frank, if you're still here, can I ask you to clarify, because now I don't know what your comment is connected to. So I wonder what two demographics we're talking about. Probably talking about the demographics for breastfed and non-breastfed children, and that HIB, the HIB you were referencing, which I'll admit I'm completely unaware of.
It was a small study. It wasn't that big, but it was big enough for me to believe that it would
hoover up into your confirmation bias.
Yeah, to just not need to vaccinate, right? Because I was breastfeeding.
Yeah.
So.
Bob was saying he's one of 10 kids, and Marsha said, "Oh my God," I think that's what that's about. And Marsha says the trend in New York is getting non-FDA approved formula from Europe.
And then another scary trend, because a lot of things can become cults, and even if you're an adult and plant-based, then great. But a lot of these extreme vegans are making their infants homemade plant-based formula out of things like nut milk and sea moss, and babies have died. Like
Yeah.
Small children have died on vegan diets, and the only thing approved for kids 2 and under is cow's milk, formula, or breast milk. Like, there shouldn't be homemade anything.
Did you say sea moss?
Sea moss.
Wow.
Sea moss. Yeah, I know. And like, you can find these people on YouTube making this formula for their tiny little 5-week-old baby. Like,
oh my God.
It's insane. But again, like, I get it, that whole cult mentality, and it's almost like a puritanical thing. They won't use the soy formula because the vitamin D in it comes from sheep's wool, lanolin. So it's an animal sourced vitamin D. So they won't use the scientifically approved formula, and they'll make their own out of like nut milk and sea moss and like weird things. Like, it's crazy.
I'm sympathetic to veganism as a counteractive measure to climate change emissions, but I'd still rather a flexitarian approach where people just still don't starve to death or don't undernourish their babies or their pets, because I saw once a picture of this dog and he had big dark circles under his eyes, and the owner had said, look at the joy and excitement in his face because I've made him this vegan casserole. And somebody was saying, that is not joy, that is not excitement, that those markings are indicators of this huge vitamin deficiency. Effectively, you're torturing your dog by making them eat vegan.
And it's not sustainable. Like, people aren't gonna keep sustain, like, in terms of like wanting to stay that way. Like, food is such an inherent part of culture. Like, you want what you want on Thanksgiving and Christmas and whatever. Like, I'm sorry, but a tofu turkey is not. And I did the vegan thing. Okay, so I'm in cult. I've been in the cults. Okay, I've been all the cults, and I did the vegan thing for a year. And I'm telling you, you can tell yourself all you want that tofu turkey is the same thing as a real turkey, but it's not. It's not, and it will never be the same. And there's and food is important, and especially in Indigenous cultures, which I being in Canada, I really respect. That their culture and their food, like, that is just leave them alone. Like, and so for like, if you want to eat meatless all your whole life, go ahead, but like, don't require it of other people to be like permanently vegan, because there's a lot of nuance and things that are important, and I really like a lot of like Indigenous people are learning how their ancestors ate and cooked, and they're touching on
let
their
them
that way.
Engage with their roots and their culture, and go hassle politicians who want to continue billion-dollar fossil company subsidies if you're that keen to help the environment. That, like, they've suffered enough. My grandmother always used to say that to me. Actually, she survived the Holocaust, and if she felt that my behavior was giving her grief in any way, or that anybody was giving her grief in any way, she would invoke the Holocaust and say, I've suffered enough. and it really desensitized me a little bit, but I was also terrified to hear more from her. I was like, okay, if I hear any more details from her about what her experience was, that will give her more power over me to like completely disconcert and shame me if I displease her in any way, shape, or form. So
my parents, it's different being raised by having like trauma in your history. And my parents came from the former Yugoslavia, and again, like, I tend to lean fairly liberal. I did go through a phase, and I'm sure everyone's toyed with different ideologies or whatever, but where I was like, oh, I'm conservative now, and then I was like, I'm not conservative, these people are nuts. But
it's good to see there are journeys, aren't there? We're all on journeys.
And with my parents, like, what they went through in communism, like, and that's where I kind of got a little scared, because people started comparing, our version of socialism to communism, and then things I heard about communism growing up were very horrible. Like, my mom was essentially a child slave, like, for the government of Yugoslavia. Like, her her mother died of TB and her father became an alcoholic, and social services came and took her away. And she basically worked for, Yugoslavian farms from sun up to sundown, doing heavy farm work and
like a poorhouse in modern day Yugoslavia.
Yeah, like she was just, that's what foster parents were. They were farm owners that needed help. So that's where you went. And most of the time she couldn't even eat at the table with them. Like she got fed after everyone had left the table, whatever there was left. And so, like, I hear stories like that, and then, someone starts comparing things to communism. You start to go, oh, whoa. But
we don't want that. No slippery
I don't want that either.
Over here.
Yeah, and so, but you can still care about people and have, socialism in a way, like not pure socialism, but like the way Canada.
There's a happy medium between the excesses of pure vulture capitalism, unregulated capitalism, and the excesses of lip service, pure equality of communism, where people do get subordinated to the state. They go, let's reject individuality and let's reject competition. And it's like, actually, competition is a driver of human excellence and helps feed people and helps them live quality lives. And when you cut that out and you legislate against competition, and subsume everybody into the state, then you're actually giving tyrants a big hand to oppress people, and also just really.
And it's just a divisive term at this point, like the way they do it is to scare people from caring, like capitalism wants to hold on to what it has. And so if we just call, taking care of the people that need it most, communism, then we're not going to go that way.
If you speak disparagingly of wealth, it does tend to sound like you're a communist. Like my instinct just then was to say, a wealth protection racket. But I go, that makes me sound like a communist. And I'm not a communist. I just want to say, like the kind of self-serving pursuit of wealth where you start, you don't care if you're hurting people and there are inadequate legislative safeguards or inadequate enforcement of legislative safeguards. Because I don't want capitalism without guardrails. And I don't
responsible capitalism. That's what someone said. I call it responsible capitalism. Yes.
Responsible.
Someone's telling a vegan joke. Should we
Yeah.
What do you call a vegan with diarrhea? I don't know, Craig. I'm scared.
I'm scared too. While we're waiting, Bob notes that he's the only flesh eater in his family. That's enough to make me vegetarian for a little bit. My grandsons have never had meat, but then they are not vegan. They have cheese and eggs, etc.
Yeah,
and Eleanor notes that he has no milk ducts, and it was formula or they would die. And Marsha's children were all formula fed as well, and they're fine. Absolutely.
Salad shooter?
I'm relieved that it's not as evocative for me as I thought it might be. What do you call a vegan? Is there such a thing as a salad shooter? Like that's a real thing?
Maybe the joke lost on me.
Marsha calls it responsible capitalism as well. Did she?
Yeah, no, that's what I was reading when I saw that. I said, yes, that makes sense.
Yeah. Marsha says we should have less meat. That is fine. Absolutely, we should. And how manipulative of it was the Fox News network that ran with this study that said if you want to reduce climate emissions, people should eat less meat. And then also talked about how the Biden administration want to bring down emissions, and then said, had a little chyron at the bottom that said Biden's plan to reduce your meat consumption. And then everybody else in the media bubble conservative network ran with that. Biden's going to force you to only have one burger a month. He's coming to steal your burgers, which is so funny. They've come with that theft panic so much. Under Trump, he, in his desperation before the election, was saying, Biden's going to kill God. He's going to come take your Bible, take your guns. If you vote for Biden, God is dead. And I was like, wow, to me, that's quite humorous. But to somebody who's advanced really far down the slope of just embracing everything that they say because you're in the cult.
QAnon. Oh my gosh.
Yes. Then that makes sense to you that the Democrats are going to kill God and
No, if you're you're in QAnon, they're talking directly to you. Like they're in on it and they know, and that's your confirmation bias. Like, you know, like when Trump said, like, I don't know much about them, but I know they're great Americans, you know, like that was like a secret, like maybe he doesn't, but that was like a secret nod to them, and they like ran with it. And he like, that is so irresponsible, because these people, just the stuff they believe, like the doppelgangers and the executions.
Yes, and the Joe Biden was a hologram. Oh, executions. I don't know about that. I knew about the adrenochrome. Oh, yes, I do know about the executions.
Oh, the adrenochrome, yeah.
They're
always saying the executions are coming, or Biden was executed and now, you know, he's been replaced with a clone. I mean, well, what? For what?
Clone technology is great nowadays.
I know. What end? It doesn't make any sense. Why replace him with a clone that looks exactly like him, that's doing the exact same things he would have done anyway? It doesn't make any sense.
I've never watched the series Lost, but I imagine that, you know, there's some viewers who just kept tuning in even when a series jumps the shark. So that would be a great term to describe QAnon. The QAnon probably jumped the shark at its commencement, but to the fans of the series, they're going to keep tuning in no matter how weird it gets, because there's a time, it's part of the fabric of their lives now. They've got to tune onto that channel for as long as the show is on.
Yeah.
So yes, they believe that people are, and they're encouraged to have bloodlust for executions. They're just really excited to hear that Democrats will be executed. So if they haven't been executed yet, well, then they'll still keep tuning in, because they're waiting for that breaking news.
Yeah.
So executions to come.
It's just,
That's why I'm really glad that Trump lost, and that the insurrection coup effort also lost, because they would have tried to execute people. They had been promised
100%,
that.
100%. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like, and it's crazy how divisive it is. I shared an article once on how they if anyone believed that the insurrectionists were in fact Antifa, like, you're in a cult. Sorry. And I guess one of my Republican friends read that and was very offended and decided, when we had known each other for years, and she decided to never talk to me again. So, you know, and even with, it was very painful for her that I believed that, and you know, but sorry, like, no. Like, that's not what happened. You can look at those people and know, like, that's not Antifa.
Yeah, and you can look at, maybe as more details come out about the court cases and people accept plea deals, and just the details of their lives come out. Laura Ingraham was interviewing two people the other day that have been investigated for maybe having Nancy Pelosi's laptop at their house. And there was this big joke to them. They're like, yeah, we've just asked around. Nobody's seen Nancy Pelosi's laptop. So maybe one day it'll turn up. I don't know. And it was, it's so ridiculous. It's like, so you broke into the Capitol and you've been charged with breaking into the Capitol, but you're just making fun of this additional detail that you were a suspect in the theft of technology from the Speaker of the House, who's like, what, in the Gang of Seven that gets read into, you know, critical security intelligence for the United States. Like, that's not a joke. That was a massive breach of security that occurred on a day in which masses of Trump voters and Fox audience members were compelled by the pressure of all of that cascading torrent of disinformation to attack police officers, Capitol police officers, DC Metropolitan police officers. And
it's powerful. Like, this stuff they believe is so, like, they're very entrenched in it, and like and it divides families. Like the Trump thing, like it divided families more than any other presidency ever. Like, usually, like, Republicans and Democrats are kind of two sides of the same coin in a lot of ways, and just for some key differences here and there. But you know, you could still get along at Christmas dinner, and it wasn't this huge fight to have all the time. And now it, you know, like, there's families that are broken up forever over this. Like, and even I'm in Canada, and it had nothing to do with Trump necessarily, but I have one brother who's really into conspiracy theories. I haven't talked to him for years. Like, and then another brother who went that direction when the pandemic hit, that's how he chose to make sense of it, was to say like it was all a hoax. And you know, he's got a channel on YouTube that thankfully isn't popular, but he shares like anti-mask and anti-vax stuff like all day long. Like he's just talking to anybody who will listen. And the province I live in is quite conservative. And so a lot of people feel that way. And ironically, we have the highest COVID rate in Canada right now. So, you know,
and it's not really that much of a coincidence, is it? The higher levels of conservatism, the lower the compliance rates are with public health initiatives. Yes.
Yeah, and it's and so like this, I don't know how we're gonna, like everyone says like we'll go back to normal, but even like after the public health stuff is done, like will we go back to normal? Because I think there's a lot of hurt feelings.
Yeah, there's a lot of hurt. I'm just looking, I'll bring up on screen a small video of a Republican Congress member. Her name is Representative Michelle Steele. She's from California, and she's apologizing in this video. It's 27 seconds long. She's apologizing to other Republicans for daring to work with a Democratic representative on a piece of legislation against hate crimes, to make hate crimes against Asian Americans illegal. And so I'll bring that up on screen so we can hear that, because that's going to be just more evidence of how extra vituperative the political environment is when somebody has to apologize for working on a bill to reduce violence against her own racial demographics. So I'm just going to press play on that.
Second bill is that stop hate crime against AAPI. Actually, most progressive Katie Porter, 45th district, she and I actually introduced the bill together. So that's in Judiciary Committee. I know I don't want to work with her, but I need her to pass this. That's the reason. And then, sorry about that. And third one, second bill is
okay, so at least she's not apologizing for passing the bill. She's just apologizing for working with Katie Porter. Like, oh, I'm so sorry I worked with a Democrat. It used to be more like something you could boast of. Look at me, I'm able to work with Democrats. But I think it became on the Republican side as they descended more into a sort of totalitarian friendly political party that was pursuing one party dominance and by undermining democracy, that it became more of a mark of shame. Sorry for upsetting you by daring to even work with a colleague.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Bob notes that the brother he lost to COVID, his younger brother, he had only talked to him 2 times in 4 years. So yes, I think your brother was Pentecostal or evangelical Christian, Bob. I don't remember. And Indall Smoker says there used to be decent, respectable Republicans, but they've long left the party. Just the crazies left in the GOP now. Yeah. There might still be people who have an element of decency, but who are very lost to cult thinking, because I think there's 70% of Republicans who believe that Joe Biden didn't win the election, that Donald Trump was the legitimate winner of the last presidential election, which means, to look on the positive side, that there's 30% of Republicans that at least have enough of a media diversity diet that they can accept that Biden is the president and that Trump lost. And I know it's a distressingly small percentage of Republicans, but we have to work with reality. We can see the cost of denying reality or shunning reality in favor of something more convenient or palatable. But it is what it is. At least there's 30% of Republicans who might be open to the idea that there's an element of cult thinking in the Republican Party, that they have the example of at least some Republicans of conscience who denounce what Trump did. And they are potential people who can be eroded from that base and who might then help America have a new era of pro-workers' rights, of just swinging that pendulum a little bit away from indulging corporate interests at the expense of wage earners, and having people who manage to get better access to healthcare and better schools and better supported infrastructure in the US that could all be in America's future if more and more Republican voters call into question the integrity and the ethics of Republican politicians. Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed it might be a plus.
You know, it's weird because you guys just don't dissolve your parties and rebuild them, but in Canada we do. Like
really?
the Conservative Party, you know, we've like they dissolve and then they rebuild as a new party because what happens is they do something to like displease their or scandal or displease their constituents. So then they'll be like, well, we're just going to lose to the Liberals if we don't, you know, go at it in a different way. So they'll like dissolve and then reappear as a new party. And even in Alberta, like we have a couple different Conservative parties that.
So you've got a much higher political churn rate.
Yeah. And just more variety. We have 3 parties that are kind of popular here. And actually, the NDP party, which is called New Democrat, they're more like Democrat socialist kind of party. Like they actually won in Alberta one year, which surprised everybody because Alberta is like a hugely conservative demographic. And then they went a little bit too, well, I think people were voting to have a balance in our government, but everyone voted, so they kind of went too democratic socialist. So then everyone panicked at the last election, and then it went fully back to conservative. But I think that was a mistake. But we didn't know COVID was coming, so like our government has handled COVID so poorly, and I think next election it will be NDP again. So.
Who leads? Because Justin Trudeau is the president of Canada, but you're talking more locally about.
I'm coming, like provincially. So we have 10 provinces and 3 territories in Canada, and so I'm speaking on a provincial level, like state level.
State level, yes, and which is hugely consequential for states. You can see in terms of the different outcomes for American states, what the consequence has been of having like a Trump loyal.
I knew my vote. So, and I know it sounds pessimistic to say, but I knew my vote the last provincial election wouldn't matter. So I joined the provincial Conservative Party just to have a vote in who they put as the leader for our area. Because if you're part of that party, you can vote for what the representative is. So I knew I wouldn't have a say.
You wanted to vote in the primaries, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
To get a less Marjorie Taylor Greene type of person.
Yeah, so I voted for the younger guy that was like, he had kids and was like, he worked in a factory, and he was not like a business, old, white, rich guy. He was like more represented the people more. So I actually ended up voting for him, and he won. So he actually represents our area. It's not a very big area of Alberta, but he represents it. So I kind of think sometimes you have to play smart, because if no one votes in those, then they just elect the richest guy basically, and that's who's running.
So you had an element of pragmatism inform your voting decisions.
Yeah, even though I'm more social. Like, I'd probably vote NDP if I could. Like, I don't even think there was a
center left. Center left?
Yeah, I'd say center left. Yeah, politically.
Marsha's still grieving what has happened to this country. We used to get along, just had our own ideas about politics. You've lost friends over this.
Mm-hmm.
I sympathize with you, but I'm, at least for me today, I'm feeling that there's elements of potential. I'm feeling optimistic. I'm feeling like there's elements of potential revitalization. And that, look, for African Americans, they probably always saw the division, that there were people who were their allies, and that there were people who maybe hid their racism, but who were specifically promising voters that there could be lower taxes with a sort of wink, wink, we won't let any of those people get social services. And that was the unconscious promise of a lot of libertarian thinking in the Republican conservative side of politics. And now we see more of the ugliness of that. It's been laid bare. The hoods are off for a lot of it. So even though... I
just can't believe how little your government helped you. Like, you guys got a one-time payment of $1,600. I lost my job last year, and I got paid like 2,000. Like, I didn't even apply for the benefit, for the actual like COVID benefit. I just applied for unemployment, and they still gave me the COVID benefit, and I made like $2,000 a month for like 5 months. And then I went, and people were like, oh, no one's going to go back to work. I still went back to work. Like, I could have claimed it for a few more months, but I found a job I wanted and I went back to work. So like
people actually enjoy work, provided their job is not.
Yeah, like I did not. Yeah, I was like, okay, it's time for me to go back to work because I'm getting a little stir crazy and cabin fevery in the house, and it's time to go back.
And you've probably felt like it was safe enough. I mean, that's the point of various governments offering COVID payments, to make it easy for people to stay home until things got better.
Yeah, and I can't believe, like, and it took how many months? Like, how many people became homeless in that time? Like, I don't understand. Like, it's like,
well, there was a conservative government in power at that time, and then when Biden came to power, they were able to get through Congress, because there's a president and Congress, that payment that then made up a balance to $2,000. So there was an original $1,200 payment, I think, and then there was a later payment of,
was it $1,600?
I think it was $1,400, because there was a $600 payment that they got through with Republicans in office, and then they were like, and now we'll do $1,400 because we promised $2,000, so we'll go, okay, you got the $600, and now you get the $1,400. So at least there was a second payment. There was one payment.
I just don't understand it, because like, to feed my family, and maybe I know groceries are a little more expensive in Canada, and obviously there's the difference in our value of dollar or whatever, but to feed my family of 5, like, it's like $260 a week. Like, I don't know how.
There would have been a lot of people pushed off the edge of a cliff of financial viability by that, for sure, by the absence of federal government help, and by unemployment benefits being really difficult to obtain in states like North Carolina, where they just purposely made it really difficult, and that was Republican.
And then they're like standing in long lines outside, like close together and in building. I was like, oh yeah, that's not gonna make the COVID spread. Like, but these people have no choice. It's horrible. Like,
it is horrible, and I think that footage has really highlighted for a lot of Americans that you can't boast of having a wealthy country if the citizens are so poorly served by the government, that it's not an acceptable equation to say, if you've had certain good fortune in your life, you should be rewarded for that, and the unfortunate people should be left to queue up and beg for nappies and groceries. I think a lot of people are more willing to embrace democratic policies now, and President Biden's ideas. Even amongst Republicans, there's a lot of embrace for the new policies, because the data points to say, look how horrible this is, look how many people are suffering. You can't just pretend anymore that it's just people who've made bad decisions. There are clearly working people who've had cars, who've had normal functional lives, who have been thrust into desperate circumstances because
and
of
even hearing about people, like, even before COVID, because I've always talked on many different forums on the internet and social media and whatever over the years, and even hearing people say, like, my husband works 80 hours a week. Like, what? Like, that's so messed up to me that someone would work 60 or 80 hours a week to pay their bills. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's unacceptable. It's unacceptable, and hopefully more people can accept now that it's unacceptable without having to incur the negative association of communism. It's like, oh yeah, okay. Your risk-benefit calculation changes. You become less afraid of veering too close towards communism when you can see openly more of the ravages of disenfranchising workers and making employers so powerful that they can compel people to work for so little money that they have to work 80 hours a week just to get food on their table, just to feed their families and have a roof over their head.
We put our minimum wage to $15 an hour, and it benefited in some ways. Like, I know it wasn't easy for a lot of like smaller businesses to keep up, but one, there's more competition because now people want to work. You know, people that, you know, may not have wanted to work before, or, you know, it's more compelling to work in a lower end job. So you're going to be able to choose like better workers that are doing sometimes the work of maybe what 2 workers that are paid much less would do, because they
motivated, competent workers.
You're increasing the competition.
Who have enough calories to eat that they can actually
do a good job. Yeah. And
not
have
they're getting
to
enough sleep and food to function.
So it didn't, it didn't close a bunch of small businesses or anything like that. Like all the small businesses in my town, made it. That's not what, like maybe
Nobody
COVID, because they had to shut their business down because of COVID. That might affect a few businesses, but we do offer some benefits to small business owners as well. So I'm sure not everyone's going to make it, but at least we have some benefits here if you do fall on hard times, that, you can figure it out while you get on your feet. But it's just, I don't know how.
Well, it's not strictly speaking my government though as well. I'll just put that out there and say it will be with any luck, because we're moving to Boston, but I'm not there yet. It's not my government just yet. It's just the government that I talk a lot about. And with that, I'm going to go eat some lunch. We've been chatting for 2 hours.
I know. It was such a great conversation. If you ever want to have me on again,
I would love to. That
was so great. I liked it. I hope people enjoyed our conversation, and maybe we can look at like anti-vax government memes and things like that.
We should be more organized next time. I will totally bring up questions and pre-give you questions, and so we can
just talk about the misinformation, even just because there's so much of it going around right now. I actually predicted a piece of misinformation that went hot not long ago about it was a document from the clinical trials where people were saying, see, it proves that it spreads from husband to wife. And I was on Twitter, I was like, listen, like, because I follow a lot of doctors, I'm like, this is the next big thing, you need to address it. And they're like, no, we already did. We already told people it doesn't shed, and it doesn't affect women's periods. And I was like, no. This is like a very specific piece of misinformation that you need to be on top of. And sure enough, like the next day, Del Bigtree, who's like a very big anti-vaxxer that runs Highwire, he shared it. He shared it on a news website that also shared, like the news website he shared it from had stories of like executions, like the Q style executions. Yeah. And so I was like, he must know like that's not true. Like he must know like this website is horrible, but because it appeals to the demographic, which the anti-vax movement has largely shifted into this QAnon right wing,
One conspiracy. I've had appetite for one. Give me some more. I've already suspended my powers of critical thinking.
So and I was just like, see, I knew it. I knew that's what they were gonna do.
You're a canary in the coal mine.
They're gonna run with this so bad. But anyway, I should get to bed. It's 11 here. I can't believe it. I never go to bed this late.
I wish I went to bed at 11 regularly. That would be great. Earlier, I'm a night owl. But Christopher says, thank you, ladies. He enjoyed this session. And thank you so much, Christopher. I will devise segments and bring Lydia back on again. We'll have we could have a debunking segment and a celebration segment.
And follow me on Twitter. I'm at former anti-vax on Twitter.
Oh, yes. I'll put that up on the screen. Hang on.
Yeah. And you can see my website, backtothevax.com.
Okay. Former and then just anti-vax. That's probably it.
Just former anti-vax.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, there it is.
Excellent. Yes. And then what's the website?
Backtothevax.com.
Is it back to, it's back to the vax.com.
And that has all the links to my like social media and everything I've done.
So it's not back to the, but on Facebook it's back to the facts.
Yeah, but there's a link on there to my Facebook as well and everything.
Okay. So. Okay, great. Oh, look, and Indoor Smoker says everyone support Dav Nest content on HAPS. Oh, I bet you are saying best content on HAPS, and I love it. Yes, best. He corrected it. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Marsha says good night as well, and good day to me. Yes. Bob, it's 1 a.m. where he is, so definitely off to bed for you, Bob. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for the endorsement, Indoor Smokers, and thank you so much for talking with me, Lydia. It was so enjoyable, and I will make plans with you via
Twitter. For sure. Thanks for having me. This was great.
Hooray. Cheers.
Bye now.
In the broadcast. Bye, everybody.